As Education and Partnership Leader at College Inside Track, Cozy Wittman speaks nationally about college search, educating families and training financial advisors. College search has become increasingly complex. The nuance is hard to understand, and Cozy is passionate about dispelling myths that cost families money. She's been featured in the Journal of Financial Planning on the subject of college planning. Cozy is excited to connect with organizations and families interested in learning more about the complex college search process. She is a mom of 5 kids with very different goals for college, so she is no stranger to the challenges around college search. So please welcome Cozy Wittman. This is interesting to me because I have grandkids looking at college.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's get into the book.
All right, I never need a mic. When you're a mom of 5, you project. You're used to projecting. My name is Cozy Wittman. I'm with College Inside Track. If you've never heard of us before, our goal is always helping families find right fit schools for their kids. I got into this because as we started our college search process, it became clear to me there was stuff happening behind the scenes that I didn't understand. And as we got further into this, candidly, just the way the industry works made me angry. And so I found myself without a job, and I reached out to our college consultant because I thought he had the greatest job of all time. What a fun time to help people find colleges for their kids. And that's how I ended up at the organization. And my role is 100% education. And so what I want to talk about today is how to think about some of the changes and just make you aware of some of the landscape shifts that have happened in the last few years. As an organization, we help guide families through the college search process, but our goal is always right fit for the student. So right academic fit for the student, right social fit for the student, but we're also able to help families build college lists that meet their family game plan for paying for school. Because unlike organizations that help people try to figure out how to pay back their college debt, we would like to keep people from getting into that position in the first place. And then just by getting people good information, they're making better decisions. It just does bring down the stress level. There's a lot of stress around college today. The high schoolers feel every ounce of it. And so if we can bring down some of that stress level, that's part of our goal. I think it's helpful to really understand what the landscape looks like today. When we look at price increases over the last 30 years, so if we go back to about 1993, what we see is that our public flagship universities have increased their pricing the most. They are 3 to 4 times higher than private schools. Private schools on average hanging out at about 415%. When you take all public universities together, that average is only 215%. But when we look at our flagship schools, University of Minnesota has increased pricing by 570% in that same timeline. So our flagship schools, the most expensive one I've found so far, not necessarily the most expensive school to attend, but the highest increase over 30 years is UConn, University of Connecticut, hanging out at 1,300% increases since 1993. So it's not people's imagination, it actually is harder to pay for college today than it was back in the dinosaur days when I went. I think it can be helpful, and this is 1 year out of date now. NYU hanging out at $93,000 a year, USC also hanging out at $93,000 a year. If we look at these bottom, UC Berkeley is now at $42,000 a year for the coming fall. University of Minnesota is $34,000 a year to go off to college. So I just want to give people a little bit of the state of the landscape today, because we still get a lot of families who hope to pay $20,000, $25,000 for a college education. And just like you can't go out and buy a brand new car at $20,000, you can't buy a college education really for that. And sometimes, you know, people will push back and say, well, yes, you could, there are schools that will do that, but they are not the schools that the high schoolers you know and love are bubbling up as schools of interest. So probably the biggest thing that I want to get across to people is how much the landscape has changed. Back in my day, you basically thought about schools as public and private, in-state and out-of-state when it came to pricing, right? And it was very clear. And I started our college search this way because I thought this is how it worked. I told my kids, I don't care where you go to school as long as you stay in the state of Minnesota, go to a state school, right? I thought that was going to be the least expensive option for our family. Well, fast forward, I'm going to take the top 2 kids out of the search. One of my kids didn't go to college, by the way, so I'm also not a college bigot. I don't think everybody needs to go to college. And one of our kids was a D1 volleyball search. So I'm going to take those kids off because those are really non-traditional searches. But when you look at the bottom 3 kids, one of my kids went to the University of Minnesota. One of my kids went to Drake University, a private school down in Des Moines. And one of my kids went to University of Missouri, Kansas City, an out-of-state state school. Of those 3, which do you think was the least expensive?
Drake.
You guys are so smart. I didn't even need to do the quiz with you. Drake University, by $10,000, was less expensive. Most expensive?
Or Missouri.
Good split. University of Minnesota was the most expensive.
Really?
$8,000 more a year than University of Missouri, Kansas City. So today, if you're still thinking about college as public versus private, in-state versus out-of-state, you're playing on a really old game board. It is just not how the landscape works today. Today, you really have to think about colleges as being flexibly priced or inflexibly priced, because there are public and private in both of these categories. Drake is a good example. They are a flexibly priced private university. If a student's interested in Johns Hopkins, on the other hand, or University of Chicago, or Northwestern, or Rice, Duke, Stanford, any of the Ivies, name any selective school here. Those schools, inflexible. Because the way that they think about the world is, you're so lucky to have us, right? They're not thinking like, we gotta work really hard to get our freshman class filled. Duke last year had 54,000 applicants for 1,700 spots. They don't have to flex their price. They get plenty of kids to fill those 1,700 spots. If we take public institutions, and I'm going to use the state of Michigan as the example here because they're the most extreme. If a student from Minnesota wants to go to the University of Michigan, they will pay every penny of $75,000 a year. That is the cost at Michigan today. However, if that student would be open to looking at Northern Michigan, Eastern Michigan, Western Michigan, Oakland, none of those schools charge out-of-state pricing. Everybody goes for in-state prices. And then they bring scholarship money to the table for things like GPA and test score. One of my kids could have gone to Oakland and Eastern Michigan for about 14 grand a year. But again, when you bubble up to a kid who's thinking about college and you say, what do you think about Eastern Michigan? There's a big fat frown on that kid's face. They're not interested in that. But my point is, there are schools to look at, and guess what happens when you crack open that door and you start actually talking about the accolades of that university and the experience that student is going to get on that university campus, and what the benefits are and what the cons are to going to that school. When you get kids really good information and you get past kind of the branding, they make much better decisions. And that's a big chunk of the work that we spend our days doing, right? Chipping away at that. So I think it's important to understand where scholarship money actually comes from today, because there's a lot of misnomer about what's actually happening and where scholarship money sits and where people should be hunting for it from. And the number one influence of scholarship are the colleges that make it to the list. So the number one way you reduce the price of college, if that's what you're looking to do, and not everybody is, but for the families who are, the way that you reduce it is by making sure you get schools on the list that actually do that kind of thing in the first place. Because you cannot squeeze money out of Rice. You can't squeeze money out of Carleton. They're a non-scholarship school. There are no scholarship dollars at Carleton. So if a family wants scholarship money, we can't put those guys on the list, right? So it's important to just understand the schools that make it to the list are the single largest influencer there. They're also the second largest influencer there. So after the students get accepted, there are additional opportunities for scholarship dollars. And lots of kids miss these opportunities because they don't read their emails, right? So kids get their first acceptance via email. It says, congrats, you're a bear, a beaver, a gopher, a duck, or some other woodland creature. And in that email, there's a link to additional scholarship dollars. And kids don't read their emails because they're kids, right? they would find it right away if it came via TikTok. But because it doesn't come that way, they miss these deadlines, and they miss these opportunities for additional scholarship money. Third on the list, you guys, right? Rotaries, other community groups. Why are they third on the list? Well, when colleges give away money, they bring it in the tens of thousands of dollars to the student, and it does typically last all 4 years. Local groups like a Rotary or other community groups, maybe a bank or other employers, is number 3 on the list because candidly, these are usually one-shot scholarships, right? So you get them once, and then the student would have to go searching the next year for that, and guess what? Most kids don't ever do that. They get it one time and they never look again. Also, these tend to be just smaller amounts. So if I'm headed off to the University of Minnesota and I manage to scrape together $1,000, at $34,000 a year, a $1,000 scholarship just isn't moving the needle that far, right? So that's why it's third on the list. Bottom of the barrel, where we spend when we work with families, we spend exactly 0 amounts of time, is helping the student out on the internet looking for scholarship dollars. These privately held scholarships that candidly a lot of high schools just push out because it's easy, these are a waste of time. The average student has to apply to between 50 and 80 of these to win anything, and the average award amount, $500.
Oh.
I always tell kids, you'd be better off just go get a job summer before college starts and earn more money than that. And the time, way better spent because they're learning all kinds of things about working, right? So when we think about scholarship dollars, right, going back to the flexibly priced schools, the way that colleges give away money is not really based on the student, it's based on what the college cares about, right? It's based on things that the colleges benefit from bringing that kid onto their campus for. And so the way to really think about this is colleges are businesses. They are making business decisions. And when they decide to give away money, it's because it benefits them. As parents, and I know this because I'm a parent of 5, you have a tendency to think about, so awesome. And of course the kids are awesome. The kids I talked to today put me to shame. Like, I wonder what I did with my high school days. Because the stuff they're involved in, crazy, right? But that's not why the colleges gift. The colleges gift to benefit them as a university. So the first thing you have to understand is, does the school even give away money? Because again, if their applications are high enough, there's no good reason for them to give away money. They just don't have to. So the first thing you have to know is, does the school actually give away money? And then some big round areas that colleges care about. The first is GPA and test scores. At the end of the day, colleges are competing with each other for who has the best GPAs, right? And so they're paying kids, basically, with high GPAs to come to their schools. And here's the deal. You don't have to be a 4.0 kid to take advantage of this, right? If I have a 3.2 GPA student, and we're looking at schools where the average incoming is a 3.0, that kid get more money because they're helping us bring up our average incoming GPA. And the same is true for test scores. Extracurricular talents are important, but not usually in the way that most families think about them. People have a tendency to think more is better, or I need a well-rounded kid. So I need the athlete who sings and does community service. Nope, you actually just need a student who is representing themselves well. So we're not big proponents of molding kids into something a college would be interested in. We're more interested in molding the college list into who the student is and finding schools that are interested in that. So if a student's an athlete, go crazy down the athletic path. If you want to volunteer, find a way to do it within your passion for athletics. If you're an arts kid, go all the way down that arts path. Find ways to not just be involved, but also give back to your community in an arts kind of way, right? And then how you tell your story about yourself matters. So what we think about is who is the kid, and do you have things that represent you well? And if the answer to that question is yes, you don't have to add more. Most kids already have way too much stuff on their plates. And then be demographically interesting. This is the easiest thing for every single student to do. The Cozy Wittmans of the planet, cutting their kids off from these, right? Because I told my kids to stay here. The easiest way to be demographically interesting is to leave your region. 74% of Minnesotans stay in the state or touch one of our borders to go to college. Other parts of the country almost never see a Minnesota applicant. You are way more interesting. We had a kid with a 2.8 GPA. I don't remember his ACT score. It was not notable. Get a full tuition ride at a small school in upstate New York. Why? We don't really know. Colleges don't share, but we suspect they didn't have a Minnesotan that year, right? Every college wants to say, we've got one kid from all 50 states and 37 countries around the world. So there's some big trend changes happening in the college landscape that I just want to give you guys a little bit of a heads up on, so you can have some empathy for how challenging this is. So if you have high schoolers in your life in some capacity, you can understand kind of what's happening. The first thing I want to talk about is this whole test optional landscape. Nobody is being jerked around more than people who have high schoolers who are trying to figure out what on earth are we supposed to be doing with this test. Take an ACT, don't take an ACT. Are the schools test optional? They're really not test optional. The way that we think about this is, look, unless you get severe test anxiety, where it's debilitating for you to go and take a standardized test, go take one, do it well prepped, maybe take a second, then you're done. We'll just figure out where to send the test scores afterwards. A lot of the schools that proclaimed themselves test optional, we could see behind the scenes still accepting students at higher rates who had test scores to share. And then this past spring, a really interesting study came out that demonstrated pretty compelling evidence to the colleges that, guess what, a standardized test is actually a stronger reflection of a student's success as a freshman than GPAs are. And that's partially because of the amount of grade inflation happening at our high schools. So we started weighting GPAs for things like AP classes and IB classes or the dual credit classes. But now high schools also weight things like honors or advanced classes, and those classes actually aren't credit, they're not college credit worthy, which means the students aren't really working in the college space, but they've got this elevated GPA. And so a lot of colleges are noticing things like, hey, the kids that have these elevated GPAs but never took a single college class are not more successful as freshmen. And so what we saw with that study being released this spring is a bunch of schools stepping back in the test required for 2026 and 2027. A bunch of schools, so as application numbers are increasing at the most popular schools in the country, and I know this belies some of the news coverage that you hear about how schools are closing and they're not getting enough applicants, and we've all heard about how challenging St. Cloud State is with their budget, right, and the numbers of applicants they're having, and UMD has a new president, and guess what, they're down 2,000 students a year. That is true for a lot of schools. It is not true for all schools. So the biggest brand schools in the country actually are seeing record numbers of applications. Last year, UCLA had 147,000 applications for 9,000 spots. So when schools find themselves in that kind of position, guess what they do? They lean into something called early decision. This is an application that allows the student to say to the school, I love you so much, I am coming. And you make that commitment before you've seen a financial package. Wake Forest last year took 58% of their freshman class out of early decision candidates. When you put all your eggs in a single basket, the college is no longer worried about losing you. And so any scholarship dollars that might have been available, they're not coming your direction. They might go to early action candidates, right? Unless you think, right, this is just the big brand schools. St. Olaf has 3 application timelines. They've got early decision 1, they've got early decision 2, and regular decision. They don't even have an option in the middle called early action. So they're edging themselves toward the Carltons of the planet, edging themselves away from scholarship money. When people apply early decision, they don't typically see scholarship dollars come their direction because they're making a commitment before they know what it's going to cost. And the colleges just figure if you can do that, you can just pay. Secondary factors continue to influence acceptance. These are things like something called demonstrated interest, so how often you interact with the school, the rigor level of the student's transcript, their essay and what they talk about in their essay, all of those things, really important factors, and we're continuing to see those be factors. And then the last thing I just want to point out, during COVID there was a lot of discussion around people are frustrated, they're all done paying higher and higher prices for college, and yet we're still continuing to see schools increase their prices by 5 to 8% on average. Some schools, the U, just increased by 13%. Some of the schools are trying to make up for the numbers that they did not have during COVID, so a lot of schools kind of froze their prices. So our schools dropping out, yep, Cardinal Stridge last year closed their doors, but here's what I tell people, I never met a family yet where when I ask the student, what are some schools you're kind of sort of interested in? Not a single student in 6 years, this is my 7th year with College Insight Track, 1,000 families a year I meet with, not a single one bubbled up Cardinal Stridge, right? So the schools closing their doors are not the schools that kids are branded. So I want, this is tip 3 because this is a mini version of the presentation I normally do for families and parents. But I want people to really put on their business hats now and start to think about college as more of a business decision. The colleges think about it that way. They're making choices that are good for them. And I want families to do the same thing. There's a whole bunch of, oh, I hope they let me in, I hope they let me in, thinking that happens at high school today. And I really want that to be turned on its head and get college or high school students to say, how are you, college, going to help me, student, be successful on your campus? Right? So thinking about things like, does the school teach like the student likes to learn? I have 2 kids in my household who are more hands-on learners than butt-in-chair, take lots of notes kind of learners. Right? We went and looked for colleges that reflected that learning style because that's how they were going to be successful. Making sure kids have lots of elbow room. So if you are guilty as the auntie or the grandparent who is like, what do you think you want to do for a living? Relieve that pressure a little bit because I'm here to tell you that the average high schooler has no idea what they want to do for a living. However, we do want kids to think a little bit about what are your academic strengths, what do you enjoy, and then choosing colleges that have multiple majors available in that regard, right? Not just one. And then, I've said this quite a bit, but I want to say it a lot. The big brand schools need students to be more than smart. You don't just waltz into the Ivy Leagues anymore, right? Most of those schools have average acceptance rates under 5%. And I always joke that if I said, Peggy, let's have lunch next week, and I said to you, I have about a 5% shot that I can actually make it. Do you think we're having lunch next week? Probably not. But when I say to a high schooler, you know the acceptance rate at that school is about 5%. Yep. Because they're quite sure they're going to be part of that 5, you know? And so I think it's really important for people to start really understanding there are more schools than the top schools in the country by whatever source decides that they are the top schools, and the local community college. There are 1,000 schools in the in-between space, and it's important for people to think about those. I just want to mention, I do family consultations. These are free consultations. I just sit down and chat college with people for an hour. It is bar none my favorite thing to do. When we talk through this, we get to talk through what does end-to-end process look like? Where do you start? The most common question I get from families is, where do we start? We don't even know where to start. And so we'll have that conversation. Where do you start? How do you get this rolling? Most people try and start with, well, what do you think you want to do for a living? And guess what the student does? You can just watch the curtain come down over the top of the student, right? I don't recommend that. I recommend they start with social fit. Size, location, culture on campus, because it's so much easier for the student to identify that stuff. We can get into academic fit eventually. I can give people an understanding of what is the outcome of the FAFSA going to be for your family, and so does that mean that you could pursue schools that have grants available, or are the numbers that are going to come off your FAFSA indicate to the school you're not going to qualify for a grant style scenario, and so we should just think about scholarships, right, and what colleges can bring better scholarships to the table. We can talk about that in that meeting. And then I just always want people to know that having a neutral third party, of my 5 kids, 4 are girls. They have all mastered the eyeball roll. And my youngest just turned 25. I am still not the smartest person in the room, ever. Even when it comes to college. And I'm like, you guys know, right? People bring me in to speak about this subject, right? So we get it, right? Often we say things the parents have been telling them for 6 years, but they just can't hear it. So I'm going to stop here and just take questions. I talked about the family consultation. What questions could I answer?
I'm just curious, what is your business model? So we have the free consultation and then...
Yeah, so from the free consultation, if people feel like, heck yeah, we would like someone to help us through this whole process, we do a one-on-one. They work with a consultant on our team. We do a comprehensive fee, which I'm always happy to discuss in that consultation. I don't usually do it when I present. But it's a flat rate. It covers all the work we do. And when we work with families, we actually build the college list for the student, but then we teach them to research schools because they're going to be responsible for kicking schools off the list. What I tell people is we take away the we're all in a dark room with a teeny tiny flashlight model, hoping you just bump into a school that works for you, right? So we'll build that. Then we coach the kids around things like high school course selection, how to think about their activities, and then essay application work, pacing and prioritizing, so we're the deadline keepers. Parents can just kind of go along for the ride. And then ultimately helping them with financial aid and decision process.
Can you stay and answer questions after?
I have to leave here by 1:20 because I have a family I have to meet at 2 o'clock at home. But otherwise,
Thank you.
Yeah.